Welcome guests. Thanks for coming to our talk. I'm Steven, product manager for our fraud platform at Twilio. And this is Tim, product manager for voice connectivity at Twilio. You'll be hearing from him a little bit later on in the talk. First off, congratulations on making it through day one of Signal. I'm sure you've heard a lot of inspiring stories about lives being saved through communications fueled by software. Well, at this talk, we have something different. At this talk, we're going to teach you how to hack a phone system for profit. So actually, we're not going to teach you how to hack a phone system. We're going to teach you how to defend yourself against telecom hacking, specifically an abuse called toll fraud. But the end goal is still the same. By defending yourself against toll fraud, you'll protect your margins, grow your business, and get paid. And we have a lot of exciting content in the talk for the developers in the room. We have some best practices that Tim will go through, some hands-on code. And for the business folks in the room, just some really good, relevant information for you to be aware of, these potential risks to your business. But what is this thing we're talking about? International revenue sharing fraud, also known as toll fraud. The goal is for a fraudster to generate many calls to premium rate numbers. In this case, to the country code 371, which is Latvia, a common destination for toll fraud. So now you might be asking yourself, well, what's a premium rate number? Well, premium rate numbers offer expensive termination rates to countries all over the world. In the United States, they have the prefix 900. So 900 numbers, you may know them from adult chat lines, psychic hotlines. But to really understand them, I want to take you back in time. I want to take you back to the 80s. You're a big MC Hammer fan. You loved his album, Let's Get It Started. And so what do? You want to connect with MC Hammer, so you call 1-900-909-MCMC.
Audio Entertainment presents a pumped-up insight to MC Hammer.
Hi, I'm MC Hammer. I'm the too big MC. Let's get it started. Pump it up and turn this mother out.
Call 1-900-909-MCMC.
Call us on us. Now is the time. You might hear a joke or a couple of rhymes.
Call and hear MC Hammer and learn how to leave your personal message. Call 1-900-909-MCMC. $2 the first minute, 45 cents each additional minute. Kids ask your parents' permission.
Call me. Call me. I'm MC Hammer. Hammer, what you doing? I'm waiting those calls, baby.
So he's not waiting on calls anymore. I tried calling it, and it's not active anymore. But if this were the 80s or the 90s, I could call MC Hammer. I could call Hulk Hogan. I could call Fresh Prince and Jazzy Jeff. I could even call Corey Haim and Corey Feldman and leave them a message. But what happened? So these premium numbers around, I mean, it was a great way for these artists to connect with their fans and also get some supplemental income from that dollar termination rate or 45 cents a termination rate. But what happened? The World Wide Web came out, and these expensive telephone numbers were just replaced with fan sites where you could get all that content for free. And these kind of fell to the wayside. Eventually, social media came out, Twitter became a thing. I tweeted at MC Hammer, didn't cost me anything. But these premium rate numbers are still kicking around, and they're the basis for this scheme, this revenue sharing number as a product that we'll be talking about today. So maybe I got your attention with MC Hammer. But why is this important? Why does this affect you? Well, toll fraud, it's a really big problem. Out of a total of $38 billion annually lost to telecom and telecom fraud, about $10 billion of that is due to toll fraud. And this has grown dramatically in the last 5 years. With programmatic communications, fraudsters are just constantly looking for new ways to pump toll fraud and do this abuse. Staggering statistic, about $19,000 a minute is lost due to toll fraud, which means by the time this talk is over, about $500,000 will be lost by business owners and operators due to toll fraud. But how does that affect you? And how does that affect you as an app owner or developer? Well, I want to tell you a story. So imagine for a moment you are a Tony Hawk skateboard distributor, Owl Hawk Skateboard Wholesale. You sell skateboards and skateboard accessories to brick and mortar retail stores. And you have a problem. You have a high cart abandonment rate. Because your customers buy in bulk, they like to talk to someone in sales before making a buying decision. So you want to improve that metric. So what do? You have an idea. You want to implement click-to-call using Twilio. And how does that work? Well, first, the customer would enter their phone number on your website. Then your website would make a request to Twilio. And Twilio would initiate that phone call between the customer and the sales agent. So you work with your developer, you build out the click-to-call widget, you launch it, you get really excited, you want to track your key metrics. You have leads and conversions, so you look at your dashboard, you see the leads coming in, you see some sales coming from those leads, and then 1 week it just absolutely spikes. 1,000 leads come in. You're excited, ecstatic. You can't wait to get the congratulations from management about all the sales that came as a result. But then you take a closer look, and then you realize those 1,000 calls all went to Latvia, which is strange because that's not a key market for you. You didn't know Latvia was a hotbed for skaters. So you dig into it a bit more, and then you realize all those 1,000 calls were only 10 different phone numbers in Latvia, which is really, really odd. So you talk to your sales manager, and your sales manager tells you that all those leads that came in were actually junk, and now you have a phone bill to Latvia for $8,000 for these calls that you're unsure about. So you do some Googling, you realize you're a victim of something called toll fraud. And so you ask yourself, how did I get scammed? How did this happen to me? How am I going to pay this telephone bill? How am I going to explain to management that this feature that I was so excited about just resulted in a bunch of fraud? And so, unfortunately, we see this too often, which is why we're here today, to prevent this from happening to you. So you understand kind of how it can unfold. Let's go into a little bit more about how fraudsters make money off it. So I mentioned premium rate numbers, and the first step is a fraudster will buy one of these premium rate numbers. They do so online via these premium rate number resellers. There are over 100 of them. You can Google them and find them. And they offer expensive termination rates all over the world. Next step is a fraudster will generate calls from your app. And in the next slide, I'll explain how they do that. But just assume they find a way to make calls from your app to that phone number that they bought. And so these phone calls will terminate through Twilio and then through our interconnection partners. Doug Gardner in the previous talk about building our super network talked about our carrier relationships. And we have interconnection partners, so a call will traverse many hops, eventually terminating to a shady carrier who will then share revenue with the fraudster. And so essentially, it's like a wire transfer from your bank account to the fraudster's bank account. And so how exactly do they make these phone calls? Well, if you accept a phone number in your app, well, then you're potentially susceptible. I mentioned the click-to-call scenario in the story, the Owl Hawk skateboard story. We also see them look for outbound dialers. So if you offer a dial pad and someone to sign up and dial outbound internationally, they look for those. Phone number verification flows. So if you're just sending OTP PIN codes via SMS, but also have the call option like in the bottom screenshot, they look for those and they like to essentially DDoS that call button. We also see fraudsters hack PBXs and make outbound calls through there as well. So we know the problem, we know it's a big problem and how it can affect you, but why can't we stop it? There are a number of reasons why it's difficult. The first idea you might have is like, well, why can't we just block premium rate numbers? Well, fraudsters pump to landline numbers, mobile numbers, so it's not as easy as just blocking that premium rate number range. And also compounding the issues, there are a lot of phone numbers. There are more phone numbers than there are stars in the galaxy. 10 trillion numbers across 200 countries. So even if you wanted to block ranges, it's difficult to keep up. Toll fraud case often looks like this. An app in the United States gets abused by telecom hackers in the Middle East, pumping calls to Latvia with proceeds going to a criminal gang in Eastern Europe. Because it crosses so many international borders, it's difficult for law enforcement to prosecute these fraudsters. And thus, it makes it really lucrative because it's easy to get away with. Also, we see most toll fraud happen on weekends and holidays. So depending on the size of your business, you probably don't have someone who's watching on Saturdays and who can keep an eye on things. And they're very smart about that. Also, what Doug mentioned, it's difficult to get all those carriers to cooperate. So for example, if you wanted to say, why don't carriers refuse payment for fraudulent traffic? Well, with all those carriers in the interconnection chain, they typically do business by passing the call off, expecting the carrier to pay for it, and pass it to its terminating destination. So it's difficult to get that cooperation. Last reason, don't underestimate fraudsters. I deal with fraud and abuse every day, and they operate at scale. They're a lot more organized than you think. And even if you block them, they'll continue because they know it's easier for them to play offense than it is for you to play defense because you have all kinds of competing priorities like your business. So it's a really difficult problem to solve. And now I want to pass it off to Tim, who's going to go over some best practices.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm super excited to talk to you about best practices. Our goal is to empower you to build the right safeguards into your app so you're not the next victim of a massive toll fraud attack. And since you know your users best, you need to build these safeguards so you can detect a bad actor early. When it comes to combating toll fraud, you have to build a multi-layered defense. This consists of identity verification, appropriate dialing permissions, and controlling the call velocity of your app using a rate limiter. We're going to cover each of these best practices in detail, and I'm also super excited because I'm going to demo a simulated toll fraud attack live on stage in a bit. But first, let's talk about our first best practice, identity verification. Fraudsters are lazy business people. They want to make the most money with the least effort. And your job is to introduce the right amount of friction to deter the fraudsters, but not annoy your legitimate users. And there lies the delicate balancing act that you have to craft for your business's onboarding funnel. On the one hand, you can introduce email verification. Even better, phone number verification, business address verification. As well, you can take into consideration the geolocation of the IP address. These are just some of the attributes of many, many dozens that third-party providers can use to give you an instant risk assessment of your users at sign-up. On the other hand, you could have your users talk to sales. Fraudsters hate talking to sales. But these days, in the digital economy, your legitimate users don't want to be slowed down, and they expect self-service. So now just sort of stop for a second. Imagine you've built this wonderful trial experience for your new app. Your users come on board. They get to experience the magic of it. They are delighted, and they reward you with their credit card. The truth is, fraudsters are also going to get through these front door checks, and that's why you have to do continuous risk assessment. In fact, fraudsters love to use stolen credit cards to commit toll fraud. Because unlike with credit cards where you can have a chargeback, in toll fraud, it's just a virtual wire transfer from the credit card into the fraudster's bank account. We recommend that you consider using a third-party service for continuous risk assessment, such as SIFScience. So that concludes our first best practice, identity verification and continuous risk assessment. Now we're going to move on to dialing permissions. So dialing permissions just has two simple rules. First rule, only allow calling to the countries you need to call. As you consider your global expansion for your company, take into consideration that these are the top 10 countries driving revenue losses from toll fraud. Rule number 2, disable calling to high-risk destination numbers in each of the countries you support calling to. Now this sounds kind of tricky. Who wants to figure out this long, long list of like high-risk prefixes and numbers and all the countries you want to support calling to? We know you don't want to do that work, and so we've done that for you. In fact, we've partnered with leading anti-fraud databases, and our Twilio data science team have built a high-precision scoring algorithm that have classified over 100 million destination numbers as high risk of toll fraud. This algorithm has been running for over a year with 0 complaints of blocking legitimate numbers. The list gets updated regularly. It's free, and it's available all in your accounts, and you can take advantage of it with a few clicks in the console, or you can use our new REST API. I can't wait to demo this for you in a sec, but first, let's return to the Owl Hawk skateboard story that Stephen talked about earlier. That little dialing widget, let's just zoom in on that. That is what fraudsters salivate over as they are trolling the web looking for pages to exploit. It's too easy for them to just drop in their premium number, click to dial, and start a toll fraud attack. So now I'm going to navigate over to a live web browser, and I'm going to show you dialing permissions in action. All right, so here's a live version. And we have an innocent-looking UK telephone number here, which I'm going to give a call. If we can have the audio here.
You have reached the test number. Please contact your account manager. You have reached the test number. Please contact your account manager.
Is that not the weirdest recording? So this is what's called a test number. A test number is provided by these shady carriers, these international premium rate resellers. They're provided to the fraudsters so that the fraudsters can figure out if there's a hole through the interconnection of carriers prior to purchasing a premium number. So wouldn't it be nice if we could block this number? Let's go take this number. We'll head over to the Twilio console. This is our voice dialing geographic permissions page, where we show how you can turn on and off permissions, low risk or high risk, for all 218 countries and territories that we support calling to. I'm going to go over to high risk first, and let's open up this phone number permission check. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, look for UK. I'm going to pump in that, copy in that phone number. Let's check permissions. Oh, it looks like Twilio's already classified this number to be high risk for toll fraud. Currently on this Twilio account, it's enabled to call that destination. Well, let's go stop calling that number. So I'm going to go filter here for United Kingdom, expand. Twilio has two broad categories of high-risk destinations. One is special services number ranges. These are well-known number types. You can look at the prefixes there. And we also have high risk for toll fraud. These are the numbers classified by Twilio's data science team. So let's go disable calling there. I'm going to click Save. And let's go back to that click to call widget. Let's give this a call. Blocked. Anytime there's a blocked call on your account, it's telling you one of two important signals. One, you might have a legitimate user that wants to call a low-risk destination, and that's a missed revenue opportunity. The second reason is it could be blocked by Twilio because of high risk of toll fraud. And that's a really important signal that you might have a bad actor on your platform waiting and planning for an attack. You could use that signal, as an example, consumed via the debugger. You can consume that event via the webhook, and you could say auto-suspend your sub-accounts. Blocked calls will also show up here in the Twilio debugger. So, dialing permissions. It's great. It blocks that call setup. It might deter the novice fraudster, but the veteran attacker is going to keep looking for holes, punching for holes, looking, and eventually will find a hole, will buy a premium number, and carry out an attack. And that's why it's absolutely paramount that you implement our third best practice, which is rate limiting. And you might be wondering, okay, what is rate limiting? Twilio, as an example, will rate limit any of your API invocations 100 per second. That's an example of a rate limit. But now you're wondering, well, what does a rate limit have to do with toll fraud? Well, if you think about it, a fraudster has now gone and invested time and money to acquire that premium number. And they know, as time goes on, the chances that one carrier in that chain might block that because of fraud is increasing by the minute. So when they start that attack, they want to launch as many concurrent calls as they can to make as much money in the shortest amount of time. So what might they do here on the Tony Hawk website? Maybe they'll open up 100 tabs, copy in their premium number, hit dial, 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 do some quick math, 100 calls at $1 a minute for 4 hours, which is the maximum call duration on Twilio. That is $24,000. And that wasn't a lot of effort, okay? But now if you step back and you go, well, what's a reasonable number of times that a skateboard merchant needs to call a contact agent? Maybe a few times a day, maybe 5 times over 24 hours. Well, that's your rate limit. Only allow calling to the same destination number 5 times in a 24-hour period. So now I could go, I'm gonna do a toll fraud attack. I could open up 100 tabs, but that's going to take a while. So what we've done is we've actually created a toll fraud simulator. When I hit this red button, it's going to launch 100 outbound voice calls on Twilio. I'm not going to start the rate limiter just yet, but we have a rate limiter that's going to trigger off 5 calls to that destination. Okay, so let's start this toll fraud attack. We're starting to see the estimated revenue loss already ticking up. Let's jump over to the terminal. Here we see the calls getting invoked, getting initiated. jump back over to the Twilio console. Here's the Twilio call log. And we're going to see all these answered calls. Here they all are, calling that pseudo premium number. And while these are getting set up, I just want to show you one more thing, which is the code. So this is for the developers in the room. So I've implemented a poor man's rate limiter. It's just doing two things. One, query the Twilio calls resource. How many times has this destination number been called in, say, the last 24 hours? If that exceeds the threshold of, say, 5 times, boom, let's go into the next block of code. Fetch and terminate all in-progress calls, ringing calls, and dialing calls. If we go look at that function, all that's doing is fetching all the in-progress calls and then set the status to completed. That's it. That's all you got to do to implement a poor man's rate limiter. Let's head back over to the terminal now. All right, 100 calls active. I am now going to copy this number that we've been dialing, and I'm going to go back to this dialing widget. First, I'm going to enable the rate limiter. It's now enabled, and I need to call one last number to trigger it. So I'm going to dial this number. Blocked. Let's go look at the terminal. It's now fetching all the active calls, terminating them. Looks like it's done. We jump over to the calls log. Completed. So toll fraud attack averted with a little bit of damage. Let's go see how much damage this one was. So this simulated toll fraud attack would have been, say, $148 out of a maximum of $24,000. Now, obviously, I started the rate limiter long after the attack started. So just wanted to talk a little bit about rate limiting. I showed you a poor man's version of it, but you can certainly choose to build a in-memory data store like Redis instead of invoking the Twilio calls resource. Highly recommend it. You should limit the number of calls per country per day. You can limit the spend per country per day. You can limit the call duration based on the use case, say a 2FA use case. You only need a maximum call duration of 50 seconds. And you might choose to only rate limit to international destinations. There's very little toll fraud in the US. So that concludes our best practices. We talked about identity verification, appropriate dialing permissions, and controlling the call velocity of your app using a rate limiter. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Stephen for a recap.
Thanks, Tim. So by this time, it's probably no surprise to you that the threat of toll fraud is kind of like this looming storm cloud. At any moment, it could start raining. Your business, you could lose tens of thousands of dollars. But we don't want you to feel scared. We want you to feel hopeful. We want you to feel empowered with our best practices. So if you leave this presentation with nothing else, please remember identity verification, dialing permissions, rate limiting. This is what you need to defend yourself against toll fraud. And that's not to say we're not doing anything about it. We have a growing fraud operations team that's constantly on the lookout for anomalous activity on your account. And we'll try to stop it and reach out to you in case we see anything. And we're always looking to do more for you, so you may see some fraud prevention features show up in our products later on. So in conclusion, it's not just about preventing catastrophe. It's about protecting your margins. It's about growing your business. We want you to be successful so that you're too legit to quit. Thank you. And now we'd like to tell everyone to go to the community hall to enjoy some drinks. We'll take some questions over there. It's been a long day. Thanks for coming out, and hope you enjoyed day one. Thank you. Thank you.